Hello, friends. I'm Gary Shockley. I'm the Director of Equipping Vital Congregations, and I'm sharing via this video a presentation about simplified accountable structure, what I call simplified accountable structure simplified. I get questions almost every day about simplified structure for congregations that are just beginning the process of inquiry about this as an alternative form of a governance structure in the church. And also questions from congregations who have moved into this model but are running into some challenges. I hope this introductory video will answer some of your questions. And of course, if you want more information, contact me directly through the Office of Equipping Vital Congregations through the Susquehanna Conference Center. I'll be glad to do anything that I can to help you. So for our purposes, I'm going to share my screen and bring up a PowerPoint that will guide this presentation today. One of the things that's important to understand is that the simplified accountable structure is not a silver bullet for every need or concern that a church has. And so often when I'm asked about a presentation like this, I begin by asking, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Because depending on the problem you're trying to solve, simplified structure may or may not be the right answer. It may not be the right bullet that you pull out of your holster in order to fix whatever it is you're concerned about. Fewer people making decisions is not the goal of simplified structure. One of the things I'm running into with churches that moved in this direction is that they're trying to do the same thing that their old structure did, only with fewer people, and it's not working. And so let me explain why that is and how you might avoid that. One of the most important things to begin in mind is to get clear on the why. Why are we feeling a need to do simplified structure? What problem are you trying to solve? Understanding that simplified structure won't solve every problem your church might be experiencing. Uh, I could certainly entertain a conversation with you about that and to do a brief assessment as to what the need is you might be trying to care for. So one of the questions that we ask in the beginning of a process like this is to help churches to reflect on, why do we exist? That is the foundational question behind everything you as a church will be doing. Why do we exist? And to answer this question, go back to the foundational document of the church, which is the Bible. And I've listed specifically some passages from Matthew. And I would invite you to take time to read these scriptures together, maybe in couples or in triads, or if you're a small group, to do it together, and discuss, why does Jesus say we exist? So if you're using this in a team now, you might want to pause the video, look up these scripture passages, and spend some of that time together. I'm going to suggest that Jesus gives us our why as a church. I've talked to churches that have spent a year or two around the question of vision and mission. Why do we exist? And I'm going to suggest to you that we don't have to invent this, because it's already been given to us by Jesus in those scriptures. Our mission statement as a church is very, very clear. What we do need to do is to spend time affirming it, understanding it again, and using our own language in ways to describe it. One of our churches in our annual conference did this exercise, and they came up with a simple kind of mission statement, which is, get out of the boat and share the love of Jesus. Very interesting mission statement. Get out of the boat, take risks, move out of your comfort zone, move outward, and share the love of Jesus. One of the things that Jesus says is that the entire law can be summed up in two ways. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's our mission, to love God and to love others. Finding a unique way of expressing that, like get out of the boat and share the love of Jesus, is one church's way of expressing that. You'll need to find your own. Once you get clear on why, then the structure of the church, whether it's your current council configuration or simplified structure, is the vehicle to help you live out your why with as much engagement from your people as possible, and without tying up your limited human resources, tying up a lot of people in very long meetings. So the goal is to do less or to do more in terms of the work of the church, structure-wise, with fewer people, so that other people can find their gifts and their calling for ministry and be released into that as a way of fulfilling your why you exist. You want more people, more boots on the ground, outward oriented, to live out the mission of the church, which Jesus has given us. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? What's most important, our administrative structure or the ministry of the church? Well, both are necessary, obviously, but administrative meetings are not the ministry of your church. For so long, in the early days of my ministry, I realized that we had pretty much talked everybody into believing, lay folks, that the way you serve God is by serving on a committee. Now, there are some folks, that's their calling and that is their spiritual gift, the gift of administration. We want them to be doing that, but not everybody. Administrative meetings are not the ministry of your church, but the accountability structure to ensure that ministry is flowing from the mission, that ministry is flowing from your why. That's a very important distinction. Once you understand the why you are who you are, the mission statement that Jesus gave you, you could then add the words "so that." Using the example, get out of the boat and share the love of Jesus. Okay, now that gets feet on the ground when you answer the "so that" question. Get out of the boat, share the love of Jesus, so that becomes then the strategies and goals of your church, the things that you measure, so that more people are coming to know Jesus in a personal way, so that the community is receiving the kinds of resources that we as the church can offer them for them to be whole in terms of their physical needs, their spiritual needs, their emotional needs, so that this community becomes aware that they are part of God's family. Okay, you'll have to answer that "so that" question for yourselves. But the leadership team, the simplified structure, their primary responsibility is to discern what are the needs of the community and what resources does the church bring to bear on the needs of the community. Again, outward orientation. And so the simplified structure, the governing board, they do the discernment, they do the research around all of that, demographic research, understanding the needs of the community. And then they plan and set goals. What is it we can do? God has uniquely equipped us to do to fulfill our why in tangible ways. Then to implement it, to evaluate how it's going, and to reflect on it. What needs to change, what needs to stay. So a leadership board or team that seeks to be accountable to the mission and use the rest of the church and hold the rest of the church accountable is responsible for this leadership cycle. It's just a visual way of talking about that. I like this that I borrowed from the Arkansas Annual Conference that shows how a simplified accountable structure looks and flows in the life of a church. The leadership board is accountable to the charge conference, okay, which is the ultimate governance of a local church. The leadership board, simplified structure model, serves as the church council, the trustees, the staff parish relations committee, and finance. So the 9 to 13 to 15 members of the board care for all of these areas, okay? Those are areas of governance, strategy, and accountability. And you can see ministries like the United Methodist Ministry, United Methodist Men, United Methodist Women, United Methodist Youth, other ministries of your church are connected to the board, but they're not sitting on the board. You don't have representatives from each of those groups on the leadership council. You can see the dotted line to the circle that says the leadership board creates task groups as needed for business, such as working with the treasurer to build a draft budget for the board or other things. You can have task forces that aren't board members who are working on pieces that bring back to the board. It's important to know that the nominations committee stands apart from your simplified structure or your leader board. That is a disciplinary requirement. The nominations committee is served by the pastor as chair. Now, what's interesting in this model is to note that the pastor's role, and we'll talk about this in a moment, their leadership influence is overseeing the actual ministries of the church. Those who are coordinating ministries, um, such as the soup kitchen or um, childcare, discipleship ministries, outreach ministries, all of those folks who are involved in coordinating that relate to the pastor for communication and accountability. The pastor making sure that ministries are lining up with the why, that big why of the church. How are these ministries helping to fulfill that? Any staff in the church, whether it's a part-time secretary or an organist or discipleship person, whatever, IT, whether it's part-time or full-time, the pastor is directing their work and making sure that staff members in their ministries are lining up with the why we exist, and are held accountable to whatever goals the leadership board is setting for the overall ministries of the church to make sure that there's alignment. And you can see if you have a child care director or a child care ministry, there's links there as well. So the nuts and bolts of this is the board is comprised, according to the discipline, no fewer than 9, no more than 15 people, members. And each are to serve a 3-year term. So this is going to be staggered when a new board is created. Some of your new board members will serve for a year, some for 2, some for 3. Members who rotate off can return to the board, but only after 1 year of being off the board. So it's important that we have these staggered years. Otherwise, everybody rotates off after the 3rd year, and then you have to start with a new group. Family members cannot serve on the board together. Husband and wife, members of the same household, fathers and daughters, aunts and uncles. Now, I know practically, having served many, many small membership churches in my career, that sometimes it's unavoidable. And you have family members that serve simply because of the makeup of your church. It's important that if that is unavoidable, that family members will need to excuse themselves from the room or not vote on issues that have a potential conflict of interest. So you don't want a voting block from one family to overwhelm the decisions that are being made. So if you have 2 or 3 family members, one will stay or have a say in the vote and the others will abstain. Staff and family members of staff cannot serve on the board. And I would add to that, really under any circumstance. That creates such a conflict of interest. At its first meeting of the new board, a trustees chair needs to be elected. Someone on the simplified structure will have that title according to the discipline and for communication back and forth to the annual conference. It's important to remember that everyone on the simplified structure is a trustee of the church. And if you have someone on your structure who is under the age of 18, and I would encourage having youth serve on your board, but if they're under the age of 18, they cannot vote on matters related to trustees. Again, that's a disciplinary requirement. The board serves as the 4 administrative teams of the church: the council, the trustees, finance, and SBRC. The board could consider organizing the overall ministries of the church. We're finding this is just simple and very clear, that your ministries, your ministry teams out doing the work will either fall under nurturing ministries, outreach ministries, or witness ministries. And so you could categorize them. The pastor, again, is overseeing those and then reporting back to the board. It would be important that on the leadership board, the 9 to 15 members, that you have one person. You've already designated one person kind of as the trustees chair. Designate another person as the nurture chair or outreach chair or witness chair. And their main responsibility is for communication back to their respective ministry teams. And as needs concerning finances or direction from the board become apparent, then that person on the team brings that back to the leadership team. You'll never have representatives from those groups sitting around the table. It just creates too much Too much work and too much reporting back. Members of the board represent and lead the whole church and not a particular interest group. So they're not protecting or speaking about their own narrow field of influence or initiative or whatever, but they all serve the needs of the entire congregation. So what's a board to do? What is the purpose of the board? To utilize a leadership style that combines accountability, responsibility, and authority. Number one, to make sure everything that's happening in the church is in alignment with the overall vision and mission of the church. That why statement. To make sure that there isn't drift or groups that are working cross purposes. To reduce micromanagement. To have a 2 or 3 hour meeting where you talk about every little detail in the life of the church is not the goal of a leadership board, but to synchronize and align all the church's ministries in line with the mission, vision, and values and goals. So we're reducing the number of people on the board so that more folks are freed up to do the hands-on ministry of the church and engagement in the mission field. That is the ultimate goal. So if you design a leadership structure and people are not doing that, are not finding their way into those ministries, then that's something that you're going to have to care for and work very intentionally in. And this board empowers the pastor to lead, to take the initiative and the accountability in the full life of the church regarding its ministries. What does the board focus on? It focuses on the church's yearly budget. The board has fiduciary experience, fiduciary um, um, expertise or accountability to make sure that everything is lining up with the budget of the church and the finances of the church. Confirm the vision cast by the pastor and the leadership working together, and then establish annual and long-term goals for the church. Work in partnership with programs and ministries to ensure they fulfill the mission and vision of the church, and work with the district superintendent to hold the pastor accountable. And the pastor then holds the staff and the ministry teams accountable. Please understand that the purpose of this board, a board meeting, and I'm saying 90 minutes is probably the max that you ought to be looking at, is not to hear endless reports, but to stay focused on these functions that we just talked about. Where does the pastor fit in? The pastor casts the church's vision in preaching and teaching and leadership. The pastor's responsibility is to hire or terminate paid and unpaid staff. It's good for the pastor to communicate these things to the leadership board and the leadership chair so they're aware of it, but it's the pastor's authority to do this, to make sure all the missions and all the ministries of the church are in line with the vision of the church, and to keep a pulse on the goals and how we're succeeding in our goals. What's going well? What needs to be adjusted? What do we need to change in order to accomplish the goals that we've set as a leadership board? And the pastor's responsibility is to be working with others to make sure that present leaders are raising up new leaders for the work of ministry, mentoring others, sharing ministries so that people can grow into those roles. The worst thing is to keep all of that in a small group. We want to expand that out. So leadership development is key in this. A sample leadership agenda, I like to think of this in 3 categories: loving, learning, and leading. That about 1/3 of your meeting, or 30 minutes, is about spiritual development and leadership development, developing the heart of your leaders in connection with God, fulfilling that, love the Lord your God and love others as yourself. And to talk about what that means, to study together, to read books, to resource. One resource that I would recommend for a beginning of a leadership board is this book called Witness Your Why by Jeremy Scott. We're using this a lot in many venues, and it helps you and your team stay focused on the why and to keep that first and foremost. The second third of the meeting is the fiduciary work, measuring goals. Are we succeeding in our goals or failing? How do we need to adjust them? How are new people finding us? So one of the things you might ask is, how many first-time guests have we had since the last time we met a month ago? How many of those people who are coming are here for the second or third time? And how are we helping them to get connected and engaged in the wider life of the church? And so a third of your time is talking about that. How are we succeeding in our goals? Are new people being reached? Are they meeting Jesus? Are we helping to disciple them, to help them find their ministry in the life of the church? The leadership packet is something that you'll have, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, as a way of keeping your fingers on the fiduciary work of the church without spending a lot of time in this meeting doing that. And then a third of this is what we would call the generative work, generating, innovating, creating. What are the challenges that we face? What issues are we dealing with? What are our dreams, our hopes for the future? How do we sense God leading us? How is God speaking into this? And what are our next steps together in the life of the church in the near term and also in the long term? So if you think of this in 30 minutes, and somebody will be the timekeeper to make sure that you stay on track. 30 minutes of loving, 30 minutes of learning, 30 minutes of leading. I like that. I didn't invent that, but I like that. A sample agenda. You can refer back to this later. Loving, learning, and leading. L1 is loving, L2, L3. An opening prayer, some scripture focus, testimony. How is God at work in your life? Using this time to just kind of say, we used to call these glory sightings. Where have we seen the glory of the Lord among us? We've lost our passion for witnessing. We need to reclaim that, to tell the stories of how God's at work. A second part of that L1, that first 30 minutes, is again the spiritual development and leadership development. So already, 30 minutes spent on some really significant spiritual heart work. And then you move into L2. The third thing could be a pastoral review of the annual church goals. Part of that 30 minutes was for the pastor to say, wow, this is what's working, and I just want to share it with you. Or here's where we're struggling, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. This is the time when you would also review the leadership packet, which will contain updates when necessary in writing on some of the ministry functions of the church out beyond the leadership team. I'm going to come back to that. L3 is the generative work. So this is where we talk about how do we sense God speaking into us? What new things should we be thinking about? How do we innovate what we're currently doing? Are we connecting to the community? Are we living out our why? What can we develop and innovate together? And then moving into a communications plan, how do we share what we're learning together with the rest of the church? And who needs to know what about what we're discussing here, and when and in what ways do we share that? This is crucial. More to come. And then a closing prayer for the mission field. Oftentimes we pray for our own needs and the needs of our church. Nothing wrong with that. But this is an intentional focus to be praying for those who are not here, who are not a part of our work. Maybe we're meeting them, we're engaging them in conversation, but we're praying for them because we believe that they're already a part of our church community. They just don't know it yet. Be prepared. This is the leadership packet, okay? We talked about that as a part of your agenda. This is something that can be distributed to the leadership team members prior to the meeting. I'm not thinking of a yellow envelope with 15 pages of paper in it, although maybe that is what you create. But these are just updates on anything that needs to be updated. So the pastor might contribute a lot to this based on the ministries and the happenings of things out in the field, okay? What goes in this packet are your financial reports. If you're reporting on your budget or a spreadsheet, put it in a packet, electronic or paper. What are your vital signs? What's your average worship attendance? Every month you ought to be capturing this. What's our average worship attendance online and live in COVID world? That's important. How many professions of faith have we had? Any baptism? Any missional engagements? Have we had deaths in our church family? How many people are involved in small groups? How many small groups are we developing? How are we doing in terms of generosity? But inviting people to be generous, um, how are we doing that even before we ask for an offering, to share what their giving does and how it changes lives? All of those, all of that information, you ought to create some kind of a standardized sheet or form, electronic or paper, that has like the average worship attendance, professions of faith, giving, on a Sunday basis, because you want to see trends. Are we seeing growth? Are we seeing decline? What is it we need to celebrate? The third thing is connecting new people. And this could be, again, how many new guests have we had by name? Where do they live? How are they connected? How many have come back again? This is an accountability issue and keeps us on track with how well are we receiving folks and providing hospitality. The minutes from your previous meeting would go in this packet, in this email or printed forms, and any special reports or ministry team updates. Again, the key in this is to avoid moving back toward endless report outs and conversations during your meeting. That's where things really get slow. Only bring to the table those items from the leadership packet that are absolutely necessary and need leadership team discussion and decision and approval. This keeps your team from drifting beyond their real tasks. And finally, communication is so important. Where we're hearing this failing is that those who are part of your current or former leadership team, now that they're no longer serving because you've shrunk the size of that, they feel out of touch. They used to be in the know. They were in the heart of everything. And they're saying, I don't know anything anymore. Nobody tells me anything. And it creates a disenfranchisement sense. So finding out what needs to be shared from this meeting and to whom, and in what way. How can the board support the ministry of the pastor, staff, ministry teams by keeping the congregation abreast of the board's strategic priorities and the work that they're doing toward the church's mission? How do we keep that in front of the congregation as a whole? Here's what we're working on. This is why we believe it's important. Here's how it lines up with our mission. And here's how we'd like to get you involved. Be clear about who on the board communicates back to specific task forces. Remember, I talked about nurture, outreach, and witness? Again, Charlie, how are you going to communicate back to nurture? Sue, how are you going to communicate back to outreach? Who's going to take responsibility for that? And when will that happen and how? Keeping everyone in good communication and a sense of connectedness is crucial here. And remember, the minutes of your meeting should be made available to anyone who wants them. You can just simply tell them where they're accessible and let people find them. Again, with the exception of staff parish relations committee items, which always remain confidential. So that's a caveat there. And again, anyone from your church is invited to attend your meetings. I wouldn't have them sitting at the table with the 9 or the 12 that you have. They can sit around behind that. They're there to listen. They're there to observe. If you want to invite them into conversation, you can do so, but that's not part of the deal. You're not asking for their voice or for their vote in any of the decisions that are being made. They're there to observe and to see what it is you do. And you'll want to let the church know, if you're starting this journey together, that that's part of the deal. You want openness and transparency. And it becomes the task of the chair and the committee itself to kind of make sure that you're not just expanding decision-making and conversation to 30 people in the room beyond the 9. That'll be a challenge, but you'll find a way through that. So finally, again, just remember that communication matters, particularly two-way communication, what you share and how you are hearing from your congregants. And the efforts to share and listen has to increase dramatically from where you have been in the past in this new model. You've got to be even more intentional about it. It's a good idea for your leadership team to develop a behavioral covenant. Covenant that talks about confidentiality, of praying for one another, about holding each other accountable to the tasks of the church. that covenant, how you're living out your mission vows, your membership vows, all those kinds of things. You develop a covenant, simple covenant, and each time you meet, designate a different person on your team to have that covenant in front of them. And all they're doing is just monitoring how well that group is living according to this covenant. And they can call timeout at any time during their meeting to say, I think we're violating our covenant, or we're getting really close to moving outside of it. Wow, that's a really helpful thing. But to live out of your own values and your own commitment to one another is just, how cool is that? It's so important. Again, clarity of authority matters, being clear about how ministry teams, boards, and committees work together. Making sure that, number two, in structures where there are specialists, you can read that for yourself. And that authority is granted while holding the persons responsible and accountable. You're giving authority to your pastor to care for the ministry teams and the staff of the church. And you'll want to know how that's happening. That's the accountability part. So there's good communication and clarity. If you focus on these things, you'll do very, very well. I would invite you, if you have other people that need to watch this video, to sit down with you to do that. And again, I've kind of rapidly went through this, but you could, in conversation, stop this at any time, talk about it with your team, and then start the video up again. There is a book called Mission Possible. I have it around here somewhere. It was written by Kay Catan, which is kind of like Simplified Accountable Structure Guidelines on steroids. It is so thorough. It's very well written. There'll be a lot of stuff in that that may not pertain to you because it's written with every church in mind. So depending on the size of your church, some of that will be more helpful than others. This might be enough to kind of get you started about whether you think this is a good idea for your church. I would close by saying, again, ask yourself the question, what problem are we trying to solve? If it is a structural governance problem, then simplified structure may be the thing you need to move toward. If you have questions about that, please call me, email me, gshockley@susumc.org. You can reach me through the conference website or the conference center through the EVC office. I'm glad that you spent this time watching this, and anything I can do to help, let me know. Thanks. God bless you. Good luck with all this. It's exciting stuff.